Whitecap is proudly supported by Sail Canada's BMO MasterCard. For every purchase made using the card, you win with no fees and cashback or air miles, and Canada's high-performance sailing programs get supported. This credit card is the card for Canadian sailors. Scan the QR code to get yours today. Hey, welcome to Whitecap, the Canadian Sailing Podcast. I'm Dave Krypton, longtime dinghy sailor and passionate fan of Canadian sailing. I also manage a sailing collective in New Brunswick called the Skull Island Race Team. Today on the podcast, we're talking to Fillah Karim, who is Canada's top-ranked ILCA 7 sailor, a member of the national team since 2018. Born in North Vancouver, it has been his goal since the age of 12 to represent Canada at the Olympics, narrowly missing out in 2020. After semi-retirement, he's back. His international ranking is now at 32nd and is once again chasing the Olympic dream of competing for Canada in Paris 2024, and will be representing Canada at the Pan Am Games in Santiago in October. Fillah, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So we usually start out with some rapid-fire, short-answer questions.
Okay.
So you ready for that?
Okay, I hope so.
Great. Main sheet cleats or none?
No.
Okay. Favorite place to sail?
Maybe Puerto Vallarta, Mexico.
Okay. And favorite place to train? If there is a difference.
Actually, that would have been favorite place to train.
Okay.
Yeah, because of there's so much like wildlife, so there's always something exciting when you're training. Racing there is kind of boring.
Oh, wow, okay.
And just because it's very simple venue. It's not that much happens. The same thing happens every race, but yeah, it's a very cool place to train. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. So let's say you were racing. Would you prefer there to be persistent shifts or oscillating shifts, or what would be preferred?
I don't know that I have a preference. I like when it's windy, but
excellent.
Other than that, at least I try not to have preferences because it is what it is. So, yeah.
I was kind of basing on the answer about Puerto Vallarta being sort of a boring venue in the sense that things are always so I was kind of seeing maybe you prefer somewhere that has like a lot of current or
right.
Somewhere that has something weird challenges like that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I like when the racing is more challenging. It's more interesting, more exciting. Not necessarily to say that I do better in that, but yeah, I mean, sailing is a challenging sport, and so when there's lots of variable and lots of things happening, it makes it interesting, for sure.
For sure. Would you rather be ranked 25th in the world or win 10 North American championships? And be ranked 50th, let's say.
That is an interesting question.
I know.
I mean, world rankings don't really mean anything in sailing because they're mostly a function of how many like lower level, high valued events you sail. So I guess win 10 North American championships. Although you get a lot of points for winning North American championships, so you might be having a pretty good world ranking if you're doing that.
I guess what I was getting at about this, and I'm falling off the short answer questions immediately. So, but what I was getting at that kind of is that like, how does that feel differently for you? Like if you did something really great at home versus doing something that you may be equally impressive in Europe, but isn't as nice as a number, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, people don't really follow sailing anyways, so I don't know that anybody's paying attention to you winning in North Americans versus finishing 40th at Palma or whatever it may be. So, and from an achievement standpoint, or like, it's more just like what was the challenge. I mean, if you go to North Americans and no one's there and you win, then not a big deal. But if everybody's there and it's a challenging event, then of course that's something you'd be proud of. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's always nice when if you perform at an event that has a cool name, you can be like, okay, I performed at this World Cup or this I guess North Americans or whatever it may be. But the following around sailing is so little that if you're doing it for telling people something, you're not going to get where you're looking for, anyways.
That's funny. What would you say is your weakest point of sale or condition?
Um, I've been struggling this season specific. Well, actually, no, I've struggled for a while in lighter winds, sub 15 knots, let's say. That's been a limiting factor, and specifically this year, we've had two regattas this year. We had the Europeans, and then we had Palma. Both were pretty much or majority in that wind threshold, and those were my two worst events in the last couple of years, and it made me realize that last year my results were much better, but I got kind of lucky because every regatta was windy, and so I got to hide that weakness, and it showed more this year. So yeah, that's definitely something that we need to fix, and yeah, we have a plan to attack that over the next couple months here. So yeah.
Awesome, awesome. It's funny. I was talking to somebody recently, Thomas Fogg, actually, and he was saying, and I'd never thought of this before, but he was like, Canada is a light air venue. Like, if you take, I mean, Canada is huge, but all the major population areas, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, are all light air venues. And I just really never thought that. Like, yeah, it's true. So how do we expect to be great at heavy air sailing if you train most of the time in Canada, right?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because Canada is a light air venue, but even more, Canada is a flat water venue, which is weird because we have massive coastlines. But this is something that we've kind of all identified. Like everywhere that people sail in Canada, everywhere, very small waves, and so we've been trying to. I mean, to be fair, I don't sail very much in Canada anymore. It's been a long. I mean, we did some training camps in the fall, but for the most part, like even when you give the example that Canada's light wind venue, but for me, most of the sailing I've done has been out of Canada, and so most of my experience, like my kind of foundational years, were in Sydney, and that was a windy venue, and so that's also played into how I've become the sailor that I am. But yeah, it was interesting. We were trying to do some training in Canada and chase down venues that have waves. And so this fall we went out to train in Port Renfrew, which nobody goes to sail in Port Renfrew. It's the west coast of Vancouver Island, but we were like, look, we need waves because you never race in flat water venues. Even if the venue should be flat water, it never is once you have all of the activity of all the coach boats and power boats, and so you just never sail in it. But 100% of the training you do in Canada at the regular venues is flat water, and so that's been a bit of a fun that was a bit of a fun exploration to try and find something a little bit different.
That's really cool. Was that I sort of followed that on Instagram what you guys were doing, and was that Andrew Lewis specifically like trying to find these things for you? Was it a team building kind of thing, or what was that? How did that come about?
So I think it was the right group of people at the right time. Because for me, this was a dream for a lot of years. I always said, like, let's go train on the west coast of the island, and it was just never something that I had enough other people ready to get behind. And then I guess because anybody who's from BC is like, that's ridiculous. You like, it's too remote. It's too, like, you just don't do it. And everyone's kind of set in the ways of like what we're used to doing. And then you get Andrew coming in as the coach, and he doesn't know anything so he has no preconceptions. And I'm explaining it to him, and he's looking at the map, and he's like, "Yeah, hell yeah, let's go train there. It's gonna be big waves, it's open ocean." And Andrew's good at kind of making things come together, and making the relationships and making the pieces. So yeah, it was a good combination. And we also had Kyle Martin involved, who, like me, is from BC, and he was able to help us with making some of the logistics happen. And Adrian Vlasic, also from BC, is my best friend, also coaches out here, and he was out scouting venues on the west coast of the island for us on a fishing trip and reporting back where we should check.
Oh my god, that's hilarious.
So it all kind of just came together.
Was there like no one out there? Like, were there fish? Like, who was there? Port Renfrew is the town you said you went to, right?
Port Renfrew is a fishing town, which is pretty dead outside of the summer. And yeah, it's very remote. Like, there's no cell service. There's no grocery store. The closest grocery store is to drive about an hour and a half away. And yeah, it's big trees. There's a marina. The Mill Bay Marine Group hosted us at their marina there. And Yeah, not too much else.
And so it was successful then. That
It was successful. It was a weird weather anomaly where our fall out here when you normally would have been cold was like summer weather, and so we need to go back again and see, that was just, it was almost too good to be true. Like, we need to confirm if that is reality. But no, we had reasonably good conditions every day, and we had some reasonable wave state, and so I don't know if you could compare it to the kind of venues that we normally train in Europe, but relative to where we train in Canada, I would say it was definitely up there at one of the best or better places. So, yeah.
And did you come out east as well to the bay, to St. Margaret's Bay?
Yeah, we did. So we did a training camp in Halifax as well. Um, it it was good for some things, but it didn't give us the wave. Like, we thought that we were going to get more waves, and we were doing a downwind camp, and so it was good in the sense that the wind was quite reliable. You got a sea breeze most days, but again, you're practicing in a condition that you rarely are racing in, like with the small wave state, and so it didn't quite satisfy what we're looking for. But I'm sure there are other venues on the East Coast, same as on the West Coast, where you should be able to get big waves. I mean, this is Canada; it's massive oceans. Like, it should be easier to find than what people are normally sailing in, and so something to explore more. Maybe now as we get later into the quad and things become more important, we don't have quite as much time to play around with that. But yeah, it's definitely something to explore.
It's interesting because just like, it's in Canada, or, I'm from the East Coast. I'm from New Brunswick and raced a lot in the Bay, in St. Margaret's Bay and Halifax. And I think it's like in the Atlantic provinces, there's like 4 regattas, right? The Bay Wind Regatta, and then Arc, and like there's 4 of them, the same ones every year, same locations, same venues. And I think you probably sort of have that in Europe too, right? Where there's the same 4 or 5 places that you go, and you end up only being able to sail in those venues, right? So I think we need to break out a little bit, and find different places.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. How did you find the 2009 Pumpkin Bowl? How was that as an event?
2009 Pumpkin Bowl was my first ever regatta.
Right.
I sailed in the 420, so that's the only regatta I've ever sailed in a 420. I was lucky. I got partnered with a good sailor. I was the crew, and I really did nothing. Like, I really was really had no idea what was going on. He carried the weight for the team, and I believe, we won that regatta. And but I really don't give myself very much credit for it. It was really just my first exposure to racing, and I remember just like the little things, like hearing people yelling at each other, starboard, what's going on? Like, it was really a first experience, but just the excitement of racing and being in that environment was really cool, and I don't know, must have contributed to sticking with the sport.
So tell me then how you did start sailing, and that journey, like from, let's say, the first time you were in a boat until the 2009 Pumpkin Bowl.
Yeah, so it's a pretty short timeline. I did a learn to sail camp that in the summer of 2009, and not super memorable. I remember I was really bad. Sailing was scary. Like, when the boat would heel over, I was like, nah, like this is not for me. This is scary. I always tell the story. I remember just being out on the water. It's double-handed boat. I was the crew, and it was like 6 knots. But I mean, I don't know what 6 knots is. This is my first exposure to it, and the boat heeling over as you're sailing. And I told the guy I was sailing with, I was like, look, like, let's just point the boat into the wind. We don't have to sail, and then we can go in and just like not do this. So yeah, I remember being really scared of it. I remember being really bad at it, and then there's a gap in my memory after this experience as to why I decided to join the race team. Maybe there's things that I'm missing about, like, from that first experience, because obviously something made me, like, there was an email that came out from the West Van Yacht Club to join the race team to everybody who did these learn to sail camps, and for some reason I signed up, and so then it was like the first maybe 2 months I was sailing 420s, and I was like really quickly falling in love with this. Like, this was my thing, and then the progression, if you want to get serious here, back in that day, maybe not so much the case now, I don't know, was you move into the laser. And so I was really pushing to move into the laser. And it was within that fall that I switched to the laser or the radial. So that was when I was 12. And yeah, that it was at that point, I'm like, okay, I'm training for the Olympics, quit everything else. Would have dropped out of elementary school if my parents let me, but that wasn't on the table, although I pushed hard. And yeah, just from that point, it was just a very single-minded, one-track pursuit, and kind of put everything else aside in life, and that's the path I've been on for 14 years now. Is that right? We're 2023, so more or less.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, looking at your story and having followed, where you've trained and who you've trained with and different places and events you've been to, certainly, I think you would agree you're like sort of a unconventional path compared to a lot of the sailors on the national team or at higher levels in Canada. Like, how would you describe that, and why was that the choice? And take me through that.
So for me, it was I can't compromise. I'm very bad at compromise, which can be annoying to people around me. But it's like if you're pursuing being the best, compromise doesn't go in that same sentence. And so as I was coming up, it was always just like, well, what's available for me here? And there really wasn't much available within the Canadian system. And so then I was forced to look outside. And so then I was really just pursuing, like, who can give me the opportunities that I believe can put me on a path to what I want. And so when opportunities would come that were, do a training camp, whatever, go train for a couple weeks in Toronto, and maybe you'll get coached, maybe you won't, maybe you'll have a couple guys to sail with. It's like, okay, that's not going to get me where I'm looking to go, and so I'm not interested in that. And then I was just kind of continuing to put myself out there until I could find opportunities that I was like, okay, this is a coach who knows how to make good sailors. These are top sailors who are better than me, who can bring my level up. Okay, this is something that I can get behind. It's full time, and so that was really how things developed for me. It was just, I'm not going to do something that's not going to put me on the path to my goal, because everything was very driven by that goal. And yeah, that took me around the world, and I got exposed to a lot of different stuff, and for sure the journey was very challenging. Like, going through it, there were so many failures, so many setbacks. Progress was so slow that in a lot of ways it felt like, maybe I wasn't moving forward, maybe I wasn't doing the right thing. But then when I look back at it from kind of a higher level and more perspective, I did improve more than anybody else in Canada in that time frame. And I did go from being, in 2015, 2016, completely off the radar to being within contention of being the top Canadian. And I'm not to say I was the top Canadian, Rob was the favorite. But I was in that conversation, and I was right there. And so and I don't think that had I stayed within the Canadian system, and to be fair, there wasn't really a Canadian system, but if I had stayed within the Canadian system, there's no way that I would have made that jump that I did in that time frame.
Right. And you said that you went to Sydney originally, like that was the
so that was the first kind of professional program that I was a part of. After graduating high school in 2015, I was still in the radial for that summer because I was trying to qualify for the Youth Worlds. And so after failing to do that in August, then I was like, okay, time to switch to the floor. I immediately went full-time out of high school. There was no hesitation in my mind, even though I wasn't on the national team and had no results and no external validation. This was just a fact of life that I was going to do everything I could. And so then it was just, okay, where do I find an opportunity to train? And so first I reached out to the national team. So I did give the Canadian system a chance, and I was turned down because who are you? Like, because at that point there actually was a national team, but I guess my level wasn't good enough to be invited to be a part of that. So I was turned down. There was like one program, it was like a part-time program. Everybody was in school out in Ontario. I was like, okay, this can't give me what I'm looking for. And so I just started to reach out kind of to everybody, people I knew, people I didn't know, within the sailing community. And I eventually got introduced to this program in Sydney, which was coached by this quite well respected coach from Australia, Brett Baer.
Sure.
And he worked with an international training group in Sydney. So there was a South African who had been to the Olympics in actually maybe not. He had qualified for the 2016 Olympics already, so because this is in 2015. Then there was a Singaporean who had also qualified for the 2016 Olympics, and he had also been to the 2012 Olympics. And there was an Irishman who had just left the program. And so they had this gap because they needed to share costs, and so they were willing to give me a chance. And so just by kind of reaching out to everybody, eventually somebody connected me with these guys. There was actually two people connected me with them, and so the first email kind of went unnoticed. Then second, we're like, okay, fine, let's give this guy a chance, and then I flew down to Sydney and was a part of that, and yeah, that when I always look back at that time frame is really like the foundation of when I properly learned how to sail the laser. Brett was an amazing technical coach, and we did a lot of hours. Like standard training session was 4 to 5 hours, wow. Sailing 5 days a week, and just kind of built the technique that's my foundation of how I sail now. So yeah.
Well, I actually, so Mike, I have some connections to Brett. First of all, he won this regatta that I was at the
okay. Cool.
He won almost every race too. It was a really heavy air thing in Dublin, in
cool.
Dunleary, Ireland. So cool, really cool guy. And then last year in the last spring, he did a training camp in Connecticut that I was able to go to. And I learned like so much in the 6 hours that I was with him. I learned probably more than I've learned in 10 years. Like He's amazing, just such a sweet guy. That must have been a great experience.
Yeah, it was.
And that reminded me, like when Thomas was telling me about how Canada is sort of a light air area. I was thinking, like, do people in Australia, have they ever even seen a hiking bench, or is it just like you just go sailing?
No, they do like their hiking bench, but yeah, when you're sailing in Sydney, you don't have days that are not hiking, and that's true of pretty well every venue that these guys sail in Australia. So they obviously are now, they go to Europe and they struggle in light wind. They try and resolve that, but yeah, so for them, or sailing in Australia, it's like the sub 15 knot wind frame. Maybe you get it for like a half hour as the wind builds, but it's not what you're sailing in.
Right.
So it's a different experience for sure from what you're coming up with in Canada.
Yeah, I think actually no, and I just listened to Tom Slingsby on a podcast too, and he said they got so good and heavy that usually you go running or training on your bike when it's light air, but they would start doing that. It was like if it was 20 knots. He would just go out running and biking and wait for the light air days, to train in those, because he was like, that's where his weakness was,
Yeah, that makes sense.
So you did talk about, or tell me about the Pan Am trials for 2019 for Canada.
Yeah, so that was a very memorable experience for me because I came... Like I had been working consistently for so long, full time since 2015, and then it was like, okay, now this is where you actually have to need to perform in the context of this 2020 Olympic quad, because first you have the trials for the Pan Am Games, then you have the trials for the Olympic test event. They were 1 month apart, and then that's kind of like the first trials where you get to stamp your dominance or not on the Olympic quad, and so I had a really solid, I guess, fall winter season of training. Then had a falling out with my coach the week before coming to Fort Lauderdale for this, so we split up. And I called my best friend Adrian, and he flew in last minute and became my coach, and he actually stuck with me through the rest of that campaign. But so it was the two of us in Fort Lauderdale, and Adrian came through for me the last minute, and yeah, so racing. Like I came out pretty strong. I think I finished second in the first race, and I had like I put a lot of pressure on myself at this regatta. Like I remember just being like full activation, like hardly sleeping at night, just like really, really intense. And I still had kind of a mentality of trying to control the environment and not like I didn't want to see results. I did not want to know what was happening because I was like, I just need to create this bubble around myself where I'm not in, like, where nothing can throw me off. And so yeah, so I started the regatta well. Although I don't know that I actually knew how well because I wasn't looking at the results. And so yeah, every day, like I was going fast downwind. That was something that I had fixed in that last, like, in, let's say, the 3 months leading up to that, and that was really my edge. But yeah, so over the course, and I didn't know this, but going into the last day, I had led the trials from start to finish. I didn't know because I wasn't doing the math to say that I'm ahead of Rob or behind Rob. And I mean, I had a sense that I was doing well, but because there's like little things that happen, people start to message you on social media and tell you, okay, you're doing this. I remember this actually threw me off a little bit. I remember in the washroom before going out sailing, someone came and asked me, "Oh, so are you planning to match race Rob because you're ahead?" I'm like, "Oh, okay, no, now I know." And then I kind of tried to just forget about that. But like I put a lot of pressure on myself to the point that I was that vulnerable that somebody could say something and it could get in my head. And then yeah, so it was interesting because it was when we were there that day, it wasn't even clear if we were going to race because the wind was quite light. And so we went out and there was decent wind, quite shifty. And so we sailed a first race not knowing if we would have a second race, so we had to treat it like there was going to be a second race. And I had the intention in that race, maybe it was right, maybe it was wrong, but my plan was to just sail my own race, not worry about trying to match race or do anything complicated. And so I got off the start line, I was doing well, like I was ahead of Rob, and then I kind of started to think about him, and I kind of sailed a bad angle to get over to him and then to cover him, and then I was like, oh no, actually I should just sail my own race. And
wow.
So there was a lot of, like, in my head there was just so much, this meant so much to me that I couldn't accept that the reality of racing is you're not in control of everything, and you can just go out there and you sail your race and you execute your plan and the outcome will be what it will be. But I couldn't accept that the outcome will be what it would be, and so I kept trying to do too much, and that was what happened. Like I tried to do too much in that race, and then he ended up, I don't remember the actual points, but within that race, he finished enough places ahead of me that he was ahead of me in the regatta, and so that's like when I say that I choked, that's kind of what I am considering choking. The fact that I couldn't just commit to sailing my way. I was trying to do too much. And then we did have a second start. I believe we even got onto a second beat, if I'm not mistaken. And I needed to put like a certain, maybe like 4 places between Rob and I, and we were battling on the right. And then the race got abandoned, and so we never got to finish that. And so that was that trials. And I mean, ultimately, I always look at it from my perspective, where I'm saying I didn't perform, but at the end of the day, Rob was the more mature, kind of emotionally controlled sailor. He sailed a consistent regatta, and when the pressure was on, he did the job. So he won the trials. There's no question in my mind that he earned that. But my own experience was that when the pressure was on, I didn't perform, and yeah, that was a hard thing to process because it was like,
that must have been really hard.
Yeah, it was, and because it was like also just how mentally exhausting that week was, because I put so much into it and it meant so much to me. And so then to be like, because like the whole campaign, it was also like, I guess I had something to prove, and here it was like within reach of proving that I actually could do this, coming from where I came, and to actually be like, okay, now I'm the top in Canada, and to get that spot, and then to fall short was like that was tough. But yeah, that was the first time that I was like just so mentally exhausted that I was like, I don't know if I have the energy. But then we had Miami World Cup within 2 weeks, I think, which was also qualification, and this time was for the Olympic test event. And so I did have to go back into that same kind of intensity and race once again. But yeah, that was that story.
So what do you think? Okay, so if I was going to debrief you on that, like you said, you have no control. That's the beauty of this sport, right? Is you don't know you don't know who's going to show up. You don't know what the wind is going to be, and so you really do have to let go of some of that stuff, right? Like, you know, yeah, if it had been a different, you know, if you got in a shift or whatever, that's not really the sport necessarily in that venue, but so that's you said it. It's like you can't really control all those things, and then I guess the other one would be, do you think that was a mistake to not look at the results, or what do you think?
So I think that it's a mistake to do anything with the mentality that if somebody says something or whatever, like that you feel vulnerable to information. And so if I was sailing that regatta thinking that I can't see the results because it's going to throw me off, that mentality is a very weak mentality, because all it takes is one piece of information and now you think you're thrown off. And so I don't do that anymore. I'm very much like, I don't need to hide from anything. Like, I look at the results. I don't fixate on the results. Like, I don't want to go down that path either. But yeah, that mentality of trying to hide from anything is in my view a weak mentality, because you're saying that all it takes is this one thing and it's going to throw me off, and it's not. It's just a piece of information, and being mentally strong is being able to kind of compartmentalize and process information down to what's relevant to your task, and then to focus on that. So
Right. That's really, I think there's a lot of learning in there. And so I do have this section in the podcast called Hijack the Guest, and that's where I ask my guest to help me with a particular element of my sailing.
okay.
I need help with my like downwind technique, especially when it's like marginal waves. You might be able to surf on every fourth or fifth one. This is the kind of thing that Brett is like amazing at, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, if you were going to take me through like what you do with your body and what you do in that kind of condition, what kind of tips or what kind of things would you tell me to improve?
So we're talking about like relatively light wind.
I guess it's yeah, let's say it's 5 or 8, 10 knots. So it's not like planing conditions at all, but you might catch every, you know, fourth or fifth wave. So it's choppy, but it's not windy. Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to give specific input without seeing somebody sail, but generally speaking, like, downwind is all about feel and reacting to what you're feeling. And so it's about like really feeling for the pressure in the main sheet. And so like the default is usually to start like load up by the lee with the pressure in the main sheet, and then you work off that power from there. So you press into the by the lee, and then you're coming up, and potentially depending on the wave angle, maybe you're doing an upturn. But it's really, it comes from feel. And so I find that to teach downwind, or the way that I've developed downwind, yes, I have gone out and looked for coaches who could really teach me specifics, but it's a lot about hours, because it's about developing like a feeling, like, okay, in this moment with these waves and this wind and this feeling, this is what I should use. And then you develop all the different tools of how you can move in the boat and how you can develop a skill set. And so that's where coaching can help, is to say like to give you like the biggest toolbox of tools that you can use, but it has to be combined with a lot of time to identify at this moment, this is what I need. And so as far as like to give you something, I would just say you look for the feel in the main sheet as a starting point, and that's your feedback on if you pull too fast, then you lose the pressure in the main sheet. If you turn too fast, you lose the pressure in the main sheet. And then just to visually pay attention to where the boat wants to go. I think a lot of people, or myself included, often have like this concept of treating downwind like it's systematic, and so it's like upturn, downturn, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And downwind doesn't work like that. Like it's a feel. And so the way that I developed this is I did a lot of sailing with my tiller tied within a small range. And that allowed me to feel like, where does the boat actually want me to go, and develop a sense of like, within these waves, where should I be going? And then you kind of learn to react to that and work within the confines of what, it sounds silly to say, but what the boat wants, as opposed to having this like systematic upturn, downturn, because the waves don't work like that. Like downwind is an art. And yeah, so that's my little.
That's great, and that idea, like, because people often say like, sail without a rudder, but I'd never heard of that. Like, just so you tied it off so it could move 5 degrees, 10 degrees one way or the other, and then just try to kind of keep it in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. And so then you're sailing. You're not touching it, and and then you're just learning to get that feedback of what the boat wants when you're not just being really aggressive with your rudder and overriding everything else.
Right, right.
Um,
That's
yeah,
cool. That's helpful. Thank you. Do you do much sailing like on your own or like mostly with a coach?
yeah. Nowadays, basically never. Um, but I did do a decent amount over the years, early on. When access to coaching wasn't there, um, or if I was doing extra training, I used to do that. Silly, but like what I told you when I used to train with Brett, and we would do 5-hour sessions,
Yeah.
5 days a week. That I would go sailing by myself on the on the rest days, which maybe that was not like it wasn't really productive. But it was just kind of a mentality that I had at the time that I needed to do more than anybody else to get better. But yeah, no, nowadays it's always with coaches and training partners.
Right, and that's just because you can improve that much faster with debriefing and yeah,
Yeah, definitely. As
feedback.
as you get later into the career, like you tend to. It's quite interesting. I actually have these statistics that like so when I started sailing, I had somebody told me this concept of 10,000 hours,
Yeah.
and I bought into it at the time. I wouldn't say I still believe in that, but because of that, I tracked every hour that I sailed, and interestingly, in grade 11 and 12, so while I was still in high school, and then also like in 2016, so my first year full time, in all of those years, I sailed more hours than I do now. And so
Oh
as
wow.
you come later into your career, it's much more like you do a lot more fitness work, you do a lot more off water training. It's also like about as you're competing more, you need to balance the mental aspects so you don't burn out and you can be sharp when it matters. And so I like my days on the water are a lot less than it used to be, and so having everything in the environment to make those days as efficient as possible is pretty critical, because we just don't have as many days of sailing, and you can't have that many days of sailing without compromising the fitness build or mentally putting yourself in a position to burn out. And so yeah, that's and as you get better, you have more access to resources and more support, and so yeah.
Right. Well, if I was going to bring it all back to me again, I've been working on fitness more as well, and I had a goal of doing 24 hours on my hiking bench in the year, like 2 minutes at a time, right?
That's a
So
lot.
I was up to 22 with a couple of weeks to go, and
22 hours.
yeah, minute by minute by
Wow.
minute, 30-second chunks sometimes. But from January on, and I was working with Bruno Fontes in
Hmm.
Brazil, and I was like, I need to get to 24. He's like, dude, I don't do that kind of volume. That's crazy. Don't do
Yeah.
that. Like, especially
Yeah.
because I wasn't doing like full out good form hiking. I was just doing like sort of hang there, like I would be
Yeah.
sailing hiking. He's like,
Yeah.
no, 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 don't do that. That's
Yeah.
that's not useful. You're gonna fuck up your knees, and so yeah, I get that, but I also know that, and I was going to talk to you about your home gym, but I think that's something that people really. I mean, it's almost cliche to say that sailors don't consider themselves athletes, at a lower level, and that's really something we really, you can't control what wind's going to be, what anything, who's going to show up to race against you, but you can be fitter than the other guy if you decide to do it, right?
Mhm.
So, what's your mentality about off, on land fitness, and tell me a bit about your COVID inspired home gym.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when you're like the mentality is generally how can you get better. And so when you're early on in your sailing career, there's so many gains to be made on the water. Like you go out, you work with a good coach, and you can make a huge step forward in your boat speed. And then as you get better and better, it's like obviously you still make gains every time you sail. But we're talking about like decimals of a percent, and so then it's like how do you actually put together a regatta and perform, and fitness is where there's just always gains to be made. Maybe that's specific to me. Like I am maybe less fit than from a genetic standpoint than others are. So my starting point was maybe further back from a cardiovascular standpoint. And so yeah, now later in my career, this is where we see big gains, and so yeah, we try to. I mean, it's always a balance because it's very difficult to have productive fitness training simultaneously to sailing. And that's also where we now tend to do blocks of like, okay, we do a fitness block and then we do a sailing block so that we can be productive in both. And yeah, so let's say that's my mentality around fitness training. And then the home gym, yeah, it just kind of developed over COVID when there was too much time and not much else to do. And it was also like, okay, if you want to keep developing and sailing, keep getting better, I could sail. I mean, sailing is a sport that I could have done during COVID, but it would have been going out sailing by myself in Vancouver, and the conditions aren't so productive, and I didn't feel like that would have been the best use of my time. And so, you can't go to a gym. You're going to either waste these days or create a setup at home. And so I had quite a lot of fun creating my home gym setup. And now, yeah, I mean, I could go to a gym now, but it's all set up the way I like it and have my own space. And so, yeah, I'm very fortunate to have that space. For
and
sure.
Much more efficient, right? You don't have to actually get up and go out and put your, cool looking clothes on for the gym, that kind of
thing.
Exactly. So is that something that you might pursue after you're done sailing? I don't know. I'm just thinking if that's something you enjoy doing, are you handy? Is it, what are you thinking about after, are you going to be a carpenter or a cabinet maker, that kind of thing?
No. I mean, it's, I think the thing that drives me in sailing is I have this passion for creating and so in sailing, it was about, okay, how do I create and solve problems to create a great sailor? And so that was my mentality in sailing. And it's the same thing, with the home gym, I get that same drive of because I don't know what I'm doing with building stuff. And so just figuring it out and creating some of these pieces of equipment, I get that same passion to create something and then play it out and solve these puzzles because I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm really just visualizing and trying to think how could I build this the way that I want it. And so as far as after sailing, where I've started to find that I have quite a big passion for is real estate and everything to do with solving the puzzle and how do you create housing or whatever it may be within the confines of all the limitations, whether it be from a financing standpoint or dealing with cities and development and all of the different pieces. And so that seems to be where I'm finding that same passion that I have in sailing. And so likely that is where I'll focus my energy once I retire from sailing.
Okay. So we talked about how you kind of started out outside the national team system, but now you've kind of folded yourself back in, right, in the last year or so with Andrew. What happened? I mean, I could be wrong about that, but from the outside looking in, that seems what's happening. What made you want to get back into the Canadian system?
I mean, it's the first time that there has been a quality program being offered, and not to disrespect past programs, but let's say that there's been a complete program offered from Sail Canada. They had a program right up until I became a full-time sailor, and then in 2016 they ran out of money, so they fired the coach, and then they really didn't have a program. I guess towards 2020 they had a part-time program, and I was never interested in a part-time program. And so with Andrew, they were providing, here's a good coach and a complete program. And so I was ready to give that a chance, and then working within the system definitely has its perks as far as the support that's available around, and and also I think I've connected really well with Andrew, and we work well together, and we have a similar vision, and so being able to put some trust into a coach to build a program for you, and not having to always be in that role of having to make all the decisions, and which was quite a big part of what my career had been until then, has definitely taken a lot off my plate and allowed me to.
Oh wow! So just in terms of logistics and stuff like that.
Well, I had to do everything from logistics to finding the opportunities, hiring coaches. That also means now you have a coach who's also your employee, and there's a whole bunch of challenges that can go along with that dynamic of that relationship, and then having to source training opportunities and training partners, and there's always uncertainty. Because not necessarily getting invited, and so I would be, getting maybe an indication that people are going to be trained. I remember I got an indication that people were going to be training in Aarhus in the lead up to the Worlds in 2018, and so I'm just showing up there, and hoping that people will let me train with
Oh,
them, but
wow.
you never know. And so you're not really designing your training around everything, and you do the best that you can with what you have. And so there's no complaints. But yeah, definitely being in a structured program that's provided from the federation with the right people in place, it gives you a lot of frees up a lot of mental capacity to focus on the sailing.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, and there's a big group of you guys. There's like, I think I heard that at Palma last year, for example, Canada had more sailors in the Gold Fleet than any other country except for England, because we had so many guys there. Um,
I don't know if we had more sailors in the Gold Fleet because there would have been.
I
I
think
guess
it
there
was
was
like
4 of us.
four, yeah,
Yeah,
four, and they had
interesting.
six, and no other country had more than four.
Interesting. Maybe that's true. But yeah, no, the Canadian contingent in the laser is is big, and it seems to be that we have a pretty high number of people who are ready to work hard, which and actually want to do this properly. So that yeah, it's quite nice to have some alignment within the group because earlier on in my campaign there were other Canadians, but they were in school and they were not really in the same position as I was as far from a commitment standpoint. Um, and yeah, we have a lot of Canadians. It's interesting. I think probably now as we go forward later into the quad, the training group will be reduced in size just as far as who's actually with us in the core group, because obviously the goal is to perform at the Olympics and coaching resources need to be focused on those who are most likely to be there. But yeah, to see that depth in the country of people who want to get good and who are serious about this class and this sport is a good sign for hopefully a good sign for what's coming. And like as far as who became a part of this program with Andrew Lewis was a bit of a function of who was ready to sign on early because the program was created. Everybody, all of us had hesitations around anything being offered from Sail Canada just because it hadn't happened before. And so
Right.
different people under different circumstances join that program at different times. And so opportunities may have been available to different people as a function of when they join that program as opposed to having been something that you qualified for. And then that's kind of now evolved to being more coming from the top down from Sail Canada
Right.
because everybody now wants to be in the program, and there's no hesitations around that they have to filter limited resources to provide a quality program to the top
Now,
sailors.
what can you tell me about Andrew Lewis? Because I've heard him on a few. I don't know him, but I've heard him on a few podcasts, and he sounds like a very interesting character. Like I think in the one of the podcasts that the person asked him what his goals for the Olympics were, and he said, "My goal is to commune with nature." Um, so I don't know. What can you tell me about him as a person and as a coach?
Um, okay. Yeah, I think he's very.
Sorry.
What is the
I'll
best way?
have him on. I'll have him on for soon to defend
Yeah,
himself.
I
Whatever you
think
have to
I mean
say.
you have to hear his stories from him. He's a very good speaker, and he's had quite a. I mean, we share some things in common in the sense that we both have that experience of running mostly an independent campaign, and all of those challenges that go along with that. Andrew's also been around for a very long time, and he's worked with a lot of good sailors, and so he's been around laser sailing for enough time that he really knows the sport. And he was limited because he was too small for the laser. And so his results don't necessarily, as a sailor, don't necessarily reflect the skill set and understanding that he has of the sport because he was limited by size. And so now he's in a position as a coach where he can take all of that knowledge and understanding and apply it to athletes like myself who do have the size. And hopefully together we can reach a level that we weren't able to either of us reach individually. But to hear Andrew's to go into Andrew's way of thinking and mindset, I think you need to have him on.
Okay, definitely. It's on the list for sure. I wanted to ask you if you knew that your name gets translated often on the when Sail Canada puts your results up. Did you ever hear this?
So I heard about this for the first time. I didn't actually until you said this right now. I didn't know that was what happened. But after Europeans, I had a meeting with Mike, and he didn't want to bring up the Europeans, and then he brought it up at the end, and he was like, Fila, I don't want to bring up the Europeans. I saw that you changed your name in the results to Dear God, and I got an email from someone, and I don't know what's going on, but we don't need to talk about it. And I see you had a bad event and you're upset. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like I would never go and do something like that. And then apparently it was in a Sail Canada social media post or
Yep.
something, and I don't think it ever changed on the results. So I don't know how that came to be in the Sail Canada social media post. I'm quite confused. This was a one-off that this happened, and that got emailed to him. So I have no idea how that happened. Very odd. Very,
Yeah, so
very odd.
I wasn't involved with it, but
Yeah.
I'm kind of a geek about when our results come out. So I looked at it, and I was like, Jesus, I thought the same thing. I was like, why did he do that? Why did he change his name? So I don't know
That's
what kind
interesting.
of AI is trying to change your. I mean, is your name? Does it mean that? Does it mean something about
Yeah, so
God or?
my name means, like, the literal translation would mean with God. Um,
Okay,
it comes from a Sufi phrase, which is fanafila, which means like the concept of to be one with God, and to have that experience on earth. And so that my parents heard that phrase, I guess, as it was getting to time to come up with a name for me, and they fell in love with it, and so that's how I got named Fila.
okay. I wondered if you feel like talking about, how racially undiverse sailing is, and what we could do to make that a better situation, perhaps.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I've always been aware of. I mean, you stand out in the environment, and so that's something that I've always felt a bit out of place within the sailing community, and like I don't necessarily feel like I belong in that environment. Um, but at the same time, I don't know that I have at least overtly experienced discrimination as far as being closed off for opportunities or anything like that.
Right.
I think it's more just being in an environment where people aren't the same as me, don't have the same experiences than me, and so it's maybe less inviting for that reason. But yeah, I think sailing as a sport has a very big barrier in the sense that it's ridiculously expensive, and sailing in Canada is certainly still in a place that you can't do this if you don't have substantial family support behind you, especially early on in your career. And so if you're trying to say, well, what families are going to put money behind supporting their kid in sailing? Probably families that come from sailing because they have a passion for that, and they have they care about that. And so I think that's how it continues to remain a very non-diverse sport. Is it's just not that appealing to somebody from a different background to to do what it takes to invest and develop in the sport. Now, as far as what I think we can do differently to start to see change, I think that some changes are being made as far as ensuring that we're more open as a sport. Obviously, the financial barriers are more complex than anything that diversity can kind of try to tackle. But I think that having representation is a big deal. And so the fact that right now you have both myself and Sarah who don't fit the standard mold of what a Canadian sailor looks like, I think that makes a difference. And I think that, people, because we have quite high diversity in sailing at the learn to sail level, at least from what I've seen.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you see a summer camp, it looks like the community. And
Yep.
so as people who are getting exposed to sailing, can look up and see that, okay, actually, there's no reason why I couldn't be a high performance athlete in the sport because these people, it is a diverse sport. At least right now, we can give the illusion that it is because you see two people on the national team that don't fit that mold, and that's already a reasonable percentage to show, and so you can give that illusion. But having representation, I think, makes a difference for sure for people to look up and see that is a path that they could follow. And but will it ever fully change sailing? I don't know. I mean, it is ultimately you go to yacht club and it's all white people, and I don't know if
Yeah.
that culture will ever really change.
Like you say, the Learn to Sail programs can be, like where I'm from in Shediac, New Brunswick, you can just show up with sneakers and a life jacket, and you can go sailing for relatively little money. But then if you want to go further, yeah, it's a ridiculously expensive sport, and in fact, like also, and like in terms of like you're saying representation, and not even racial representation, but having heroes that are sailors, or people that you follow. Like I had this program, and I used to tell my kids that, like, tell me who's your favorite sailor, and they're like, I don't know, like,
Yeah.
and it's important, I think, for just to have athletes like yourself, that excel in the sport internationally, something that people can aspire to and take as a role model.
Yeah, for sure. And it's actually quite interesting. Like, I feel like there's quite a disconnect between the early levels and youth levels of sailing and the high performance level. Like, I find that, similar to what you said, that if you go to a club and you ask them who are the top sailors in Canada, they wouldn't know. And I think that that's something, not necessarily even just from a diversity standpoint, but as far as creating that high performance pathway in the sport, I think that's something that we need to improve. And it's not the fault of the clubs or the fault of the youth. It's actually I think it's our fault as the high performance sailors and the high performance program. I mean, it's a function of the fact that we don't really sail in Canada, and all of the racing we do is overseas. And so as you get good, you're not really interacting at the local level, but still, we can still create environments where we do interact. And I just gave a talk at a local regatta this weekend, and just to kind of, like, I'm trying to make more of an effort because I'm aware of this.
Yeah.
And just to create that connection where somebody can say, okay, you're the same as, like, you started in the same place as me, and now you got to the top, and so I can do that too. And that's really, like, when I give a talk, that's really my whole story, is just to emphasize that I started where you started. If I'm sitting in that, talking to a group of sailors from BC, and what did I do to get to where I am, and that just to create that connection that to the top end of the sport, because otherwise it's you would have no reason to have
they
that
might
thought.
Not even know, like, people don't even know necessarily that sailing is in the Olympics, right?
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
and what else in terms of growing the sport, people can definitely listen to the Whitecap podcast, because we're making connections there.
Mm-hmm.
So what to kind of wrap up with a couple of questions, what do you love about sailing?
There's a lot of answers I could give to that. I would say, like, one of the probably whenever my sailing career does end, the one thing I know I'm going to miss is that, actually, I'm going to give you two answers. The first one I'm going to give is, like, the feeling of connection with the boat, when your body and the boat and everything clicks, is such an incredible feeling that, like, that I'm gonna miss that when sailing is over, when laser sailing is over. And it's also something that specifically comes from being as good as we are. So once you retire, even if you go sailing, like, you don't have that same, like, you're not as fine-tuned, but that experience when the body and the boat are just in tune with the conditions, and you're really just flowing, it's such an incredible experience. And so that's my first answer. And then my second answer is just like, high performance sport is very unique in the sense that you get this opportunity to put this ahead of everything else. And, like, when you go sailing, nothing else in the world matters. Like, you leave life behind, and the only thing that matters is this very simple game of trying to make your boat go a little bit faster, try to get to the mark a little faster. And so that experience of having nothing else but this one game as your priority is very special. I think most people in life outside of high performance sport don't get that opportunity, and especially, I mean, I think this would be true of all sport, but especially sailing, where you really literally leave, like, life behind, and now you go out and it's just you and the boat and some other boats and maybe a coach, but the only thing that matters is sailing, and that's pretty special as well.
Absolutely. That's a great spot to wrap up. I would say in the future, Fillah, I hope you, even if you get into a boat when you're in your real estate career, that if it doesn't feel perfect or whatever, you still go sailing, man, because we appreciate your skill, and we also, sailing is a lifelong sport. So I race against guys in their 80s still, so it's pretty cool.
For sure.
So, Fillah Karim, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And next time you're on the water, have fun, sail fast, and make friends.